This practice is called knee drop, and we're going to come down to lying on our back with the knees bent and the feet hip distance apart. So I'm going to explain it as we go along so you can experience it in your body and how you might adapt to this practice. So let's take a moment to settle first, connecting with your breath, feeling your feet against the floor. And maybe even bring your hands onto the front of your pelvis so we can get a sense of this pelvic structure. So you've got the hip points at the front, pubic bone, sitting bones at the bottom, and then the part that's resting on the floor, that flat part, is your sacrum. So we can feel the whole pelvic structure, at least sense where it is. Then from here we have our leg bones that come out of the hip socket. So if you were to kind of press your fingers into your outer hip, you can kind of feel kind of like a little bump. That is the outside of our femur. That's where our leg bone goes into the pelvis. And then it comes up where it meets with our tibia and our fibula, and we've got our patella, which is part of our knee structure. Anyways, we really just want to pay attention to our femur in the pelvis. And so the practice, try this. Drop your leg out to the side and then come back to center. Now we're going to pay attention to how the pelvis responds as you drop your leg out. So I know for me, as my leg comes out to the side, I can feel my left hip getting lighter and my right hip is dropping towards the floor. So my pelvis is kind of rotating to the side and my other leg's kind of following along. So now we're going to come back to the center and we're going to refine. So now we want to keep our pelvis still. The pelvis structure shouldn't turn or wobble. So I'm going to explore seeing how far I can take my leg out to the side without the pelvis wobbling. And so I'm just rolling on the edge of my foot and then I'm coming back. But notice how my movement's a lot smaller, right? I'm not going all the way down. When I go too far, my pelvis wobbles. Something else that might happen is the opposite leg might start to wobble in order to counterbalance. So we want that to stay quiet as well. So I'm using my hands for a little bit of feedback. Breathing easy in and out through your nose. And then just keep going smaller and smaller with the movement of your leg until you can isolate that movement from the pelvis. So no wobble through the pelvis. Breathing easy and just let it be in the leg. So if you feel some tension in the low back, go a little bit smaller. If the opposite leg's kind of wobbling around, go a little bit smaller. And if the movement is teeny tiny, that is perfect. If your movement's a little bit bigger, that's fine too. And notice how I'm moving slow. I want to feel how the leg bone is moving in the hip socket. And you know what, you could even do this. If you've got a ball or a tennis ball, you can bring that into the side of your hip. So just kind of shove it in there. And then as your leg goes out to the side, you can start to feel the muscles in your bum working as your leg goes out to the side. So this is kind of an external rotation which uses the muscles deep in your bum, right, which is part of our pelvis, connected to our pelvic floor, that's responsible for taking the leg out to the side. Now, if that group of muscles isn't functioning well, our pelvis compensates with the wobble. Okay, so that means our whole pelvic structure isn't functioning as well together as it could be. So by being able to gain control and coordination and taking our knee or our leg out to the side and then back together, we're improving our pelvic floor function. We're also improving our core function because much of our core is also connected into our pelvis at like the most basic, simple level. That's all you kind of really need to understand right now. So like the block and strap, we don't have to do a ton of these. Let's see if we can do, 5 to 10 good ones without the pelvis wobbling. If you start to fatigue or if this one's really challenging, do 2, do 3. And then over time, you start to build up. So after you've kind of gotten a sense of what it feels like on the other side, you can bring the ball, if you've got one, under your hip on the other side. And then notice what it feels like to drop the knee out to the side. And if the pelvis wobbles, just come back, reset, and go a little bit smaller. Notice that the opposite leg wants to counterbalance. And be curious. What's happening with the low back? Is there any tension in the neck, or the shoulders, or the jaw? If there is, pause. And then go a little bit smaller. We want to cultivate ease through our nervous system by quieting the tension and the strain, quieting the wobble of the pelvis, and gaining control and coordination through the movement of our leg bone in the pelvis, in the hip socket. And then if you want, you can come back to the first side again and see what it feels like. I know for me, when I was learning these, like one side, it was usually harder to connect to than the other. So it's helpful to come back to the first side again and see what it feels like. And second time, the experience might be different. It might be easier to connect with. And if not, that's okay too. So try a few and then go back to the other side again. Aware of your breath. And if the legs are starting to get tired or a little bit fatigued, just take a break. One other element that I'm going to share is you can also bring your hands into your hip creases again, like we did with block and strap. Because this is not a vertical movement, the hip flexors ought not pop up. Right? This is more of a rotation of the leg bone in the hip socket. So as your leg goes out to the side, if you feel that hip flexor popping on, you could go a little bit smaller and a little bit slower. So that's just another layer, another element that we can start to pay attention to. All right. Have fun exploring that one. After you've done it, feel free to come up to standing, find the tripod in your feet, and notice what you feel in standing.